Rain fell in a relentless rhythm, each droplet striking the cold metal of the bus stop shelter like tiny hammers against her nerves. She clutched her baby closer, feeling the fragile warmth against her chest. A heartbeat within her hands that made the night both terrifying and sacred. Her coat, damp and heavy, stuck to her skin, and the wind cut through the empty streets like whispered accusations. She had been waiting for hours, longer than she cared to remember, watching the headlights sweep across puddles, hoping for a bus that never came. The city around her felt suspended. A world paused, leaving her and the small bundle in her arms alone against the dark. Her thoughts swirled, a jumble of worry and exhaustion, wondering how she had arrived at this point, how life had unraveled into this fragile, trembling instant. Before we begin this story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now let's begin. She shifted slightly, adjusting the baby to ease the tiny whimpers that slipped through its sleep. She hadn't eaten all day, and the bitter taste of unshed tears clung to her tongue. Every passing car sent a surge of hope through her, only to crash into disappointment when the vehicle sped past without stopping. The shelter's glass was fogged and streaked with rain, blurring the neon signs across the street into streaks of light that resembled broken promises. Her thoughts returned to the fragile thread of safety she had been clinging to, frayed now by sleepless hours and the raw edge of fear. How had she ended up here, in a city that felt larger than her courage, with nothing but determination and her baby to carry her forward? Then, without warning, the dark silence of the night was broken by the low hum of an approaching engine. She lifted her eyes, searching through the rain, and froze. A black car slid to a stop at the curb in front of the shelter, its headlights cutting a sharp swath through the gloom. The driver's window lowered slowly, and a figure emerged from the shadows, elegant and imposing, eyes unreadable even in the soft glow of the rain-slicked street. Her heartbeat spiked, fear and curiosity colliding violently in her chest. There was something familiar in the poise of the stranger, a sense of calm that pressed against the chaos of her panic. He stepped toward her with deliberate caution, the click of his shoes on wet pavement a metronome in the quiet night. His gaze settled on her, and then on the baby, and for the first time since the evening began, she felt the whisper of something she hadn't known she had been waiting for. Protection, not intrusion. Words hovered on the edge of her lips, questions she didn't trust herself to speak. But he spoke first, softly, deliberately, the voice a balm on raw nerves. "Are you all right?" Simple, ordinary, yet somehow it carried the weight of promise. She hesitated, torn between instinct and desperation, her mind racing with cautionary tales and unspoken warnings. Her hands tightened around the small life in her arms, protective as stone, yet the warmth of his gaze seemed to seep through, gentle and insistent. The baby stirred, sensing the tension, and she realized in that moment how fragile and fleeting these seconds were, how the night itself seemed poised on the edge of possibility. The rain fell harder, drumming a rhythm that matched her pulse, and somewhere deep inside she felt the first tremor of destiny, delicate and unyielding. He extended a hand, not just in offer but in assurance, a silent pledge that this night could be different. And though caution demanded she refuse, exhaustion, hope, and the faintest spark of trust compelled her to take it. Together, they moved toward the black car, the streetlights reflecting in the puddles at their feet, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance with the unknown. As she settled into the passenger seat, the baby cradled against her, she realized that the world she had known, the one of sleepless nights and relentless fear, was shifting, subtly, irrevocably, under the soft press of rain and the quiet gravity of a stranger's presence. Somewhere beyond the glass, the city murmured, unaware of the small, trembling hope that had begun to bloom inside a woman's chest. The engine purred, carrying them forward, and she held her breath, feeling the first fragile threads of a story she had not chosen but could not deny, a story that promised love, pain, and transformation in the hours ahead. And in that suspended instant, with rain streaking the windows and the soft weight of her baby against her, she knew that her life had changed forever. Before a single word had been spoken beyond the simple, impossible question. "Are you all right?" The city streets passed in a blur of wet asphalt and neon reflections, the rain streaking the windows like tears running down a glass mirror. She held her baby closer, feeling the small body tremble against her chest, and the rhythmic hum of the black car's engine seemed to echo the uneasy cadence of her own heartbeat. He drove in silence at first, his hands steady on the wheel, eyes occasionally flicking toward her through the rearview mirror, as though measuring her comfort without intruding. She wanted to ask where they were going, to demand answers, yet the words caught in her throat, swallowed by exhaustion and a fragile, budding trust she didn't recognize. The baby stirred, murmuring softly, and she instinctively lowered her cheek to its head, inhaling the faint scent of milk and warmth, a fragile tether to her own fleeting sense of peace. Outside, the world was a cascade of motion, wet street lamps and passing cars forming an abstract painting she couldn't focus on. Every instinct screamed caution, yet there was a strange, inexplicable calm in his presence, a quiet gravity that pressed gently against her nerves. She noticed the meticulous way he drove, hands precise, posture upright, his silence never harsh but heavy with intention. Finally, his voice cut through the ambient hum, soft, deliberate, careful not to startle. "We'll be safe where we're going. You don't have to worry about tonight." There was no arrogance, no claim of ownership, only the calm assertion of certainty that unsettled and intrigued her simultaneously. She hesitated, then nodded, unsure if it was agreement or submission to fatigue. Yet the warmth of his words offered a comfort she hadn't felt in days. He glanced at her again, eyes sharp but not unkind, and she realized he was watching for more than her reactions. He was watching for signs of fear, exhaustion, the unspoken burdens she carried. She wondered what compelled a stranger to care, whether this was kindness or calculation, and the question made her pulse quicken with both curiosity and caution. The baby yawned, stretching tiny arms, and she adjusted it carefully, feeling a fragile connection to the small life that had made her world, both impossibly fragile and impossibly precious. The car turned down a narrower street, quieter, the rain softer against the windshield. The city's distant sirens and muffled chatter faded, replaced by a steady, protective cocoon. She felt the subtle difference, the sense that they were moving away from danger, or perhaps towards something unknown yet inevitable. His hand brushed briefly against the gear shift, an unintentional, almost tender movement that sent a ripple of warmth through her chest she wasn't prepared to identify. Minutes passed in shared silence, each heartbeat measured and deliberate. Finally, he spoke again, asking her name in a way that seemed to acknowledge both her presence and her right to privacy. When she answered, the sound of her voice was small but unwavering, carried with the strength that only exhaustion and maternal instinct could forge. He repeated it softly, as if tasting the syllables, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, fleeting yet unmistakable. It startled her, the way the faint curve of lips could shift the gravity of a room. By the time they reached the apartment he offered, a modest building tucked into a quieter part of the city, the rain had slowed to a persistent drizzle. The street lamps cast long, distorted reflections across puddles, and the world seemed paused, waiting with bated breath. He parked, turned toward her, and without rushing, opened the door, gesturing for her to step out first. The gesture was courteous, yet deliberate, a quiet code of respect she had not anticipated. She hesitated, then moved, feeling the uneven pavement beneath her shoes, the baby secure against her chest, each step a small act of trust. Inside, the apartment was warm, the scent of coffee and faint wood polish mingling in the air. He showed her to a small room prepared for the night, simple but clean, a sanctuary from the relentless storm outside. She placed the baby on the makeshift bed, soft blankets cradling the small figure, and allowed herself the smallest exhale, a release she hadn't known she needed. The hum of the city beyond the walls was distant, almost forgotten, and for the first time since evening began, she felt a fragile pulse of hope, the notion that perhaps, just perhaps, the night could end without further harm. He lingered, quiet but attentive, his presence a silent promise of protection. She studied him in the dim lamplight, noting the lines of his face, the calm in his posture, the understated patience in every gesture. Questions remained, doubts pressed at the edges of her mind. But for the first time since she had waited at that bus stop, she felt that she was not entirely alone. The baby stirred, and he moved instinctively to help, soft hands adjusting the blankets, his touch careful, reverent. It was a simple act, yet it spoke volumes, a language beyond words. She sank onto a chair nearby, her thoughts swirling in quiet fragments of fear, gratitude, and something else she could not name. The night outside continued its slow, unrelenting rhythm, yet inside a fragile connection was forming, tentative, hesitant, yet undeniable. And though she did not yet know his story, or why he had appeared in her life at this precise, impossible moment, she felt the first threads of trust weaving between them. Fragile strands of destiny beginning to take shape in the quiet, rain-muted city. The apartment smelled faintly of wood polish and warm coffee, a quiet sanctuary from the rain-streaked chaos outside. She settled the baby into the soft blankets, listening to the gentle rise and fall of tiny chest, and felt a rare moment of stillness press against her ribs. He stood nearby, leaning against the doorframe, silent but present, watching without judgment, as if he could read the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. She studied him, noting the subtle tension in his shoulders, the weight of unspoken things that lingered behind the calmness of his eyes. At last he broke the silence, his voice measured, deliberate, carrying a quiet gravity. "You can trust me, but you need to know something first." The words were careful, almost hesitant, and they made her pulse quicken. She braced herself, wrapping her arms tighter around the small life in her lap, as if shielding them both from whatever truth was coming. He stepped closer, lowering his gaze to the baby, and then back to her, the faintest flicker of vulnerability brushing against the edges of his otherwise composed demeanor. He spoke of his past in fragments, careful not to overwhelm her, each revelation folded into shadows of regret and loss. He had lived through nights much darker than this one, carried secrets that had left scars invisible to the world. And yet, his presence here was not threat, but protection. She listened, hesitant to ask too many questions, yet drawn to the honesty that wove itself into every word. His life, like hers, had been carved by hardship, yet he bore it with a quiet dignity that both unsettled and intrigued her. The baby stirred, and she adjusted the small body against her chest, feeling the warmth radiate through her tired arms. She realized in that moment how fragile their connection to safety and love truly was, how every gesture, every glance carried weight. She watched him as he moved to the small kitchenette, pouring a cup of coffee with steady hands. And something about the mundane act struck her, his care in the smallest of things, the way he existed in the world with intent, made her pulse stir with unspoken curiosity. Minutes passed, the rain tapping softly against the window like a quiet metronome marking the tempo of a fragile truce. She asked about his life cautiously, threading questions through the pauses in conversation, and he answered in quiet honesty, never revealing everything at once. Each admission was a careful unveiling, a shadow of his world touched by light, enough to build trust without stripping the mystery entirely. She found herself leaning into the rhythm, her fear tempered by curiosity that began to bloom despite the tension that clung to her chest. He spoke of loss, of family he could no longer protect, of decisions made in the quiet desperation of survival. And though the words were heavy, weighted with unspoken pain, they carried with them a strange reassurance, a proof that he had known darkness and emerged, or at least endured. She wondered at the careful balance of vulnerability and control, the way he allowed pieces of himself to surface only as she seemed ready to witness them. It was an intimacy born not of touch or words alone, but of presence, of shared quiet in a world that had otherwise offered none. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the walls, mingling with the soft glow of the lamplight. She moved closer to him instinctively, drawn not just by gratitude but by a subtle, insistent pull she did not yet understand. He noticed but said nothing, offering only steady attention, a patience that spoke louder than any words could. The baby yawned, stretching tiny limbs, and she tucked the blankets snugly around them, feeling the profound weight of care and responsibility settle into her chest. He lingered at the threshold of her space, silent but protective, and she realized that the room was no longer just a shelter from rain. It had become a threshold of trust. Shadows danced along the walls, carrying the remnants of fear and hope, intertwining with the faint rhythm of quiet hearts. And in that delicate space, she sensed the beginning of something tenuous, yet undeniable, a connection built not on certainty, but on the fragile courage of sharing fragments of oneself with another. She did not yet know what tomorrow would bring, nor whether the night's fragile intimacy would endure. But as she watched him adjust the baby's blanket one last time before settling into a quiet chair across the room, she understood a truth both simple and profound. Some moments, however small, carried the weight of destiny. And tonight, in this quiet apartment, with the rain muted against the windows and the soft life she carried against her chest, she allowed herself to believe that safety, and perhaps something more, could exist in the company of a stranger whose secrets whispered of shadows but promised a fragile light. Morning arrived softly, the rain having dwindled to a fine drizzle that traced delicate lines across the window panes. She stirred first, the baby cooing softly in its blankets, tiny hands stretching against her chest as if testing the warmth of the day. He had left the kettle on, the faint scent of brewing coffee weaving through the apartment like a gentle promise. She wrapped the baby closer, feeling the rhythmic pulse beneath her fingers, and allowed herself a rare exhale, a breath that carried relief, gratitude, and an unspoken question she didn't yet dare voice. Breakfast was quiet, filled with the small comforts of ordinary life. A slice of toast, a soft hum from the kettle, the baby's gurgles and murmurs creating a rhythm that felt both grounding and fragile. He watched her with a patience that was steady, neither intrusive nor distant, as if presence alone was the support she needed. She caught herself noticing the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the deliberate way he handled the small tasks around the kitchen, the careful respect with which he moved through the space. Something about his composure eased the tension coiled in her chest. A subtle warmth growing where fear had once resided. Outside, the drizzle softened further, and the city seemed to breathe in a slow, languid rhythm. She found herself talking to him, first in hesitant fragments, sharing memories of quieter days, stories of the past that had shaped her weary heart. He listened, occasionally nodding, his presence a quiet anchor, never judgmental, never rushing, simply absorbing the words she had been too guarded to speak for so long. She noticed the way he responded in small ways, a shared smile at a memory, the tilt of his head in understanding, the careful inflection in his voice that conveyed attention and care. By mid-morning, the baby was awake and playful, reaching out for the soft folds of blankets, grasping at small fingers and cooing with curiosity. She laughed quietly at the tiny antics, a sound she had not heard from herself in days, and he moved closer instinctively, adjusting the blankets, smoothing the soft hair from the baby's forehead with gentle reverence. It was a simple act, unnoticed by the world, but profoundly intimate. And she felt the beginnings of something tender, a fragile trust forming between them that neither could yet name. They spent the hours in quiet routine, punctuated by small gestures that carried weight. The way he carried the baby when she needed a moment to rest, the soft hums he made to soothe the tiny cries, the shared cup of tea in a moment of mutual exhaustion. She found herself observing him closely, noticing his quiet strength, the care that had become instinctive, the subtle attentiveness that spoke of a heart capable of tenderness, despite the burdens he carried. With each passing minute, her wariness softened, replaced by cautious hope she had thought long buried. Afternoon light filtered through the draped windows, casting soft shadows that danced across the room as if mirroring the tentative emotions stirring within her. She allowed herself to sit closer to him, their conversations lingering longer, the pauses filled with a quiet understanding rather than awkwardness. There were moments when their hands brushed lightly, accidental yet electric, sending a ripple of warmth that neither could fully articulate. The world outside continued its indifferent hum. Yet inside this modest apartment, time seemed to slow, bending around the small, shared universe of comfort and emerging connection. He spoke of quiet ambitions, small hopes that had survived the weight of past mistakes. And she listened, fascinated by the depth beneath the calm exterior. She shared stories too, memories that were tinged with longing, regret, and soft laughter, allowing pieces of herself to be seen in ways she had not thought possible. In the gentle cadence of words and gestures, she began to feel a stirring of something new, a connection born not from grand gestures, but from the quiet intimacy of presence, patience, and shared vulnerability. Evening came, tinged with soft gold light that filtered through rain-streaked glass, and the baby lay nestled between them, a small symbol of the fragile yet resilient bonds forming in the room. She realized with a subtle, startling clarity that the fear and exhaustion that had weighed so heavily upon her heart were slowly giving way to a fragile hope. He had become not only a protector, but a companion in ways she had not anticipated, a steady presence in the delicate, chaotic rhythm of her life. And in the gentle unfolding of this day, she sensed the beginnings of a bond that could grow, nurtured not by words alone, but by the unspoken understanding carried in every small comfort and quiet gesture shared between them. The next morning arrived with a brittle light, slicing through the blinds in thin, hesitant lines. She stirred, carrying the baby into the small kitchenette for warmth, and tried to savor the quiet, though unease clung to her like damp clothes. Even in this fragile sanctuary, memories of past arguments, harsh words, and unmet expectations pressed at the edges of her mind. Family had always been both a refuge and a prison, and now, separated from the safety of her temporary haven, their shadows seemed to follow her even here. She heard a soft knock at the door, tentative yet insistent, and her pulse quickened. A part of her had feared this moment, the arrival of someone who might unravel the fragile calm she had built. The stranger standing nearby noticed the subtle tension in her stance, his eyes alert yet patient. He remained silent, a steady presence, letting her meet the challenge of the world outside while offering the unspoken promise that she would not face it alone. The knock came again, firmer this time, and she knew resistance was futile. Opening the door revealed a face she had not expected, yet one she could never forget. Her elder sister, framed in the doorway, judgment etched in every line. The distance between them was a tightrope of unspoken grievances, years of resentment threading through the space like invisible wire. Words tumbled first, clipped, sharp with accusation, and she felt the baby squirm against her chest. Sensing the tension that had tightened the room into a cage, she answered carefully, measured, protecting herself and her child, aware that every gesture and syllable carried weight. Her sister's eyes flicked past her to the stranger in the apartment, narrowing slightly, curiosity and suspicion mingling in their gaze. He stepped forward gently, not to confront, but to offer a quiet buffer, a presence that demanded attention without asserting dominance. The subtle tension between the three adults was a fragile balance, like walking on ice over dark water. Each step measured, yet brimming with potential consequences. Conversation tumbled awkwardly, the air thick with unsaid accusations, half-formed apologies, and questions that hung suspended like uncut diamonds in dim light. As the dialogue continued, she felt a shifting in her own chest, a deepening awareness that she could no longer bear the weight of silence. Memories came unbidden, harsh words spoken in youth, moments of neglect and misunderstanding, the persistent ache of being misunderstood by those she loved most. The stranger remained quietly attentive, neither interrupting nor judging, only offering gestures of practical kindness that seemed to anchor her amidst the storm of her past. She realized the subtle power of his presence, a calm within chaos that allowed her to face long-buried ghosts without crumbling. Her sister's voice softened slightly, cracks appearing in the veneer of judgment, and she glimpsed the possibility of reconciliation, though fragile and uncertain. She spoke cautiously, threading honesty through tentative admissions, and found herself sharing pieces of her life that had been locked away, revealing the precarious reality of motherhood and the exhaustion that had brought her to the rain-soaked streets days before. Each word was a risk, each breath a small act of bravery, yet the stranger's quiet attentiveness lent her courage she had not known she possessed. The baby stirred, and for a moment the tension dissolved in the shared focus on the small, vulnerable life between them. Her sister reached forward, fingers brushing the soft hair, a gesture awkward, yet sincere, and the room softened, the heavy weight of resentment shifting into the possibility of understanding. She felt the delicate balance of old wounds and new hope, a thread connecting past mistakes with the promise of growth, though the path forward remained uncertain. Evening settled into the apartment with quiet, golden light, and the rain outside had slowed to a gentle patter. They sat together, uneasy yet bound by the fragile bonds of family and circumstance, and she realized that this encounter, however tense, had begun to peel back layers of isolation. The stranger's presence remained constant, grounding her in a reality where protection and care existed, a quiet force that allowed the past to meet the present without consuming her entirely. In the gentle rhythm of shared space, she felt the faint stirrings of resilience and hope, as if the ghosts of her past could coexist with the fragile promise of the life she was building now. Night had settled softly over the city, the rain finally easing into a gentle drizzle that tapped the windows like a lullaby. She sat on the couch, baby in her arms, eyes tracing the muted glow of the streetlights outside, feeling the lingering weight of the day's tensions and revelations. The stranger moved quietly around the apartment, tidying up, his movements deliberate and calm, each one exuding a care that stirred something unspoken in her chest. She realized with a start how deeply she had begun to rely on his presence, how natural it felt to share the small space with him, even without words. The baby yawned, stretching tiny limbs, and she adjusted the blanket, feeling the warmth of the small life she held ripple through her own body. He glanced over at her, eyes softening in the lamplight, and for a fleeting moment, something unguarded passed between them. A quiet acknowledgement of shared responsibility, of unspoken understanding. She felt her pulse quicken, a subtle awareness blooming that perhaps this connection was more than circumstance, that the fragile trust between them might be shifting into something warmer, more dangerous, more intoxicating. He came to sit beside her, careful not to crowd, his presence steady, anchoring her in the rhythm of the quiet apartment. Words were sparse, but the silence was filled with meaning. The way his gaze lingered, the subtle tension in the space between them, the unspoken awareness that boundaries were softening. She felt the flutter of anticipation, a warmth that she had not allowed herself to acknowledge, as if the simplest brush of hands or glance might ignite a fire neither had yet dared name. They shared small, careful conversation, voices low, measured, each syllable carrying weight. She found herself laughing softly at a fleeting joke, a sound that surprised her with its ease and sweetness, and he mirrored her with a subtle, almost shy smile that made her heart catch. The air between them seemed to thrum, a quiet electricity, as if the apartment itself had become a vessel for this unspoken intimacy. Every glance, every gesture, carried the tremor of possibility, of emotions that had been buried under exhaustion and fear, now surfacing gently, insistently. At one point, he reached instinctively for the baby to adjust the blanket, and their hands brushed. The contact was light, accidental, yet it sent a warmth spiraling through her, a pulse that echoed far beyond the surface of skin. She found herself looking into his eyes, searching for meaning, and caught a flicker of something familiar, yet unspoken. Curiosity, concern, and perhaps a hint of something deeper, fragile and trembling in its restraint. She looked away quickly, heart racing, aware of the intensity of the moment. But the impression lingered, vivid and undeniable. The evening stretched, soft and unhurried, the world outside fading into muted rain and quiet streets. He shared fragments of his past, stories tinged with regret and resilience, each word building a bridge she had not thought possible, connecting two lives that had collided in the chaos of a rainy night. She spoke, too, hesitantly, of fears, of dreams, of moments she had longed for but never dared to claim. Each disclosure, however small, deepened the connection, revealing the first threads of intimacy that felt both tender and terrifying. As night deepened, she noticed the way he watched her, careful, respectful, yet attentive in a way that went beyond mere civility. Her chest tightened with an awareness she could not name, a soft recognition that this evening, this quiet closeness, was the spark that might kindle a bond neither had planned for, a fire that could warm and consume in equal measure. She held the baby close, feeling the steady heartbeat against her chest, and realized that this delicate, tentative spark had already begun to light the shadows within her, promising warmth, connection, and perhaps the fragile bloom of love. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, rain threatening once more against the apartment windows. She stirred first, baby in her arms, the tiny weight a comforting anchor against the unease lingering in her chest. He was already awake, moving about quietly, but something in his expression, brief and fleeting, made her hesitate. A glance shared across the room carried an unspoken tension, subtle yet palpable, a tremor in the rhythm they had begun to share. She wondered if exhaustion and the night's closeness had blurred boundaries, leaving her heart vulnerable to interpretations she might later regret. As the morning progressed, a misinterpreted phone call broke the fragile intimacy that had begun to grow. She overheard fragments, his voice low, firm, and careful, and a sharp edge of fear rose in her chest. She misread the tones, the pauses, the subtle emphasis, crafting stories her mind could not resist. Secrets, betrayal, motives hidden in the spaces between his words. Her pulse quickened, a knot of suspicion forming as she clutched the baby closer, the tiny life against her chest amplifying every instinct to protect and withdraw. He noticed her distance, the subtle tightening of her posture, the way she avoided meeting his eyes. He tried to offer explanations, gentle reassurances, but her heart had already begun constructing walls, shadows of doubt clouding the clarity of his intentions. Her thoughts raced, imagining betrayals that may not exist, fearing outcomes that the day had not yet delivered. Each gesture, each pause seemed loaded with meaning she could not accept. And the apartment that had once felt a refuge now carried the weight of unspoken accusations. The baby stirred, sensing the tension between them. Tiny hands stretching toward her, grounding her in the reality of the moment. She breathed deeply, trying to center herself, but the image of the whispered words she had overheard clung to her, twisting interpretations into imagined truths. He reached for the baby, as he always did, and their hands brushed, light, familiar. But she pulled back instinctively, startled by the emotional storm she could not name. His eyes met hers, confusion and hurt threading through his otherwise calm expression. Yet he said nothing, letting her process, respecting boundaries she had placed even without articulating them. Hours passed in quiet, punctuated by careful avoidance and the low hum of the city beyond. Her mind replayed the fragments of the phone conversation, each repetition feeding doubt, each imagined betrayal sharpening the ache of insecurity. He moved about the apartment with careful patience, tending to chores, the baby, and even small gestures of comfort. Yet each act seemed filtered through her own mistrust, leaving both of them in a fragile limbo of proximity and distance. By afternoon, the rain had softened into a gentle mist, and the tension between them pressed quietly against the walls. She watched him from across the room, noticing the faint tremor in his hands as he adjusted the baby's blanket, the soft exhale of frustration that he masked so deliberately. She longed to reach across the distance, to dissolve the misunderstanding that clung so stubbornly to her chest. Yet pride, fear, and the weight of imagined betrayal held her still. Finally, a moment of raw honesty broke the silence. He spoke, voice low but firm, addressing the fragments she had misunderstood without accusation, laying bare truths she had not yet allowed herself to hear. Her heart constricted, shame and relief mingling, the imagined betrayal collapsing under the weight of reality. She realized how easily fear could twist the simplest actions into threats. How delicate trust truly was when hearts were tentative, fragile, and unguarded. The baby yawned, stretching tiny arms, grounding them both in shared responsibility and immediate care. She allowed herself a tentative breath, a subtle softening in her chest, and met his gaze at last. Vulnerability reflected there. The tension had not vanished entirely, but the walls had shifted, cracks forming where understanding and patience could slowly rebuild the connection. Outside, the rain continued its soft patter, a gentle reminder that even storms, when endured, could leave the world cleansed and renewed. And perhaps so could hearts when misunderstandings were met with honesty and care. Days passed in a fragile rhythm, each one marked by the quiet ache of separation. She had returned briefly to her own apartment, the familiarity of her space offering both comfort and a sharp reminder of isolation. The absence of his steady presence pressed against her chest, a hollow she had not anticipated, a pull she could neither resist nor fully acknowledge. Each evening, as the city lights blurred behind rain-streaked windows, she found herself tracing memories of him in her mind. The curve of his jaw, the soft attentiveness in his gaze, the way he had moved with careful purpose around her and the baby. The baby clung to her more tightly, as if sensing the absence, and she felt the weight of responsibility intensify alongside a quiet longing. Nights were the hardest, stretched thin by sleepless hours. The hum of the city outside amplified in the stillness of her apartment. She would imagine him crossing the room, adjusting a blanket, murmuring words of comfort, and the image brought both warmth and pain, a bittersweet reminder of how much she had come to rely on him. Every small memory of shared glances, shared silence, and gentle care became a thread pulling at her heart. He too felt the absence, though his own circumstances kept him at a distance, unable to bridge the physical space. In quiet moments, he replayed the night they had shared, the soft intimacy, the subtle sparks that had been more than mere coincidence. His hands remembered the weight of the baby. His mind the tilt of her head against his shoulder, and a quiet ache lingered, the kind born of longing unspoken. He wondered how she fared in the hours when he could not be there, how she managed the weight of fear, exhaustion, and responsibility that he had only glimpsed for a fleeting night. Letters and messages were few, carefully crafted, words chosen to ease hearts without overwhelming them. Each response, each small acknowledgement, carried the weight of hope and restraint, a delicate negotiation between longing and propriety. She read them repeatedly, tracing each sentence as if memorizing the pulse of his voice, feeling the subtle warmth of connection through the fragile medium. Even a single word from him could ignite a day with both comfort and aching desire, a reminder of what had been and what might still be. She walked the familiar streets of her neighborhood. The baby nestled against her, and each step was accompanied by the quiet hum of remembrance. Passing a cafe where they had shared brief conversation, or a corner where headlights had reflected off wet asphalt, memory surged in a tide that mingled longing with gentle sorrow. Her chest tightened with each recollection, the ache of absence mingling with the faint bloom of hope that perhaps distance did not have to sever what had begun. Night after night, she traced the contours of his presence in her imagination, each imagined glance or subtle gesture weaving a tapestry of connection that kept her tethered to him despite the miles between. The baby's gentle stirrings became a rhythmic anchor, a heartbeat shared between past and present, a constant reminder of the fragility and preciousness of what they had started to build together. She found herself speaking softly to the small life in her arms, whispering fragments of the man who had become an unseen yet vivid part of their world, as if voicing longing aloud could somehow bridge the distance. Even as days slipped by, the ache of absence remained, threaded with the warmth of memory, and she realized that longing had become both a weight and a lifeline. In every quiet moment, whether seated by a rain-streaked window or adjusting a blanket in the night, she felt the persistent pull of his presence in her heart. The distance between them, though physical, had only magnified the depth of feeling, turning simple memories into anchors and small gestures into vivid, indelible impressions that would linger until the moment when their paths could finally converge again. The day began with a brittle light, thin and unforgiving, streaming through her curtains and illuminating the fragile tension that had taken root in her chest. She carried the baby with quiet determination, moving through her apartment with mechanical precision. But every shadow, every faint noise, pressed against the unsteady calm she had fought to maintain. A message appeared on her phone, simple in its wording but heavy with implication. A secret, a revelation, or perhaps a truth twisted by misunderstanding. Her fingers trembled as she read and reread the words, each repetition amplifying the ache in her chest. Memories of him, of the nights they had shared, of the tentative trust and fragile warmth, collided violently with the sudden intrusion of doubt. She felt the small room constrict, the walls pressing in with the weight of fear and betrayal. The baby stirred, sensing the storm that simmered within her, tiny hands clutching at her coat. She pressed the small body to her chest, feeling the heartbeat beneath her fingers, grounding herself in the only certainty left. Yet even the steady rhythm could not dull the rising turmoil. the sense that the fragile foundation of trust might crumble under the weight of hidden truths. She tried to confront him, seeking the clarity that might soothe the turmoil. But every question was met with careful evasion, patience that only fueled her uncertainty. Words, once bridges of connection, now seemed like fragile threads, prone to snapping under the strain of suspicion. She wondered at his silence whether it was protection, calculation, or a choice born of circumstances she could not yet comprehend. Her mind raced, through every interaction, passing gestures and glances, weighing intentions, and imagining consequences that left her heart raw and trembling. Even the smallest acts, adjusting the baby's blanket, moving a chair, pouring tea, were filtered through the lens of doubt. She questioned motives, interpreted caution as deception, and felt the chasm between them widen with every careful gesture. Outside, the rain began again, tapping softly against the window, each drop echoing the relentless rhythm of her own apprehension. She longed for the reassurance that had once been so effortless, for the warmth of presence unmarred by suspicion. But the moment had shifted, fragile and trembling under the weight of unspoken truths. Hours stretched into uneasy silence, punctuated only by small, tentative movements. He lingered nearby, careful not to force proximity, allowing her space while offering the subtle constancy she needed, yet refused to accept fully. She watched him through narrowed eyes, torn between hope and fear, love and mistrust, and realized that the choice before her was not merely about belief or doubt, but about whether she could allow herself to surrender to vulnerability again. Every heartbeat, every measured breath carried the weight of decision. A quiet reckoning between instinct and caution, between the ache of longing and the sting of betrayal. Finally, in a quiet moment of shared attention, he spoke, voice low and steady, revealing fragments of truth without accusation, offering clarity without judgment. The words were soft yet cutting, illuminating shadows she had allowed to fester in her mind. She felt the sting of misunderstanding dissolve slowly, yet the ache of distrust lingered, a reminder of the fragile terrain on which their connection rested. The choice lay before her, stark and unyielding, to step forward into the uncertain warmth of trust once more, or to retreat, letting the shadows of fear dictate the path. She held the baby close, gazing at the small, innocent face, and realized that her decision could not be selfish or fleeting. Love, protection, and hope demanded courage she had only begun to reclaim. Slowly, deliberately, she allowed her heart to lean toward possibility, acknowledging the risk, yet embracing the fragile promise of connection. The tension softened, though not entirely vanished, leaving space for understanding, for forgiveness, and for the slow rebuilding of trust. Outside, the rain continued its gentle rhythm, washing the city in silver light, a quiet testament to renewal and the possibility of choosing hope even when fear whispers most persistently. Night fell with quiet deliberation, the apartment bathed in a soft, muted glow from the city lights outside. She sat alone on the couch, the baby asleep in her arms, warmth and rhythm pressing against her chest. The events of the day lingered, each revelation, each delicate choice echoing through her mind. She traced faint patterns in the carpet with her gaze, letting thoughts drift between memory and possibility, reflecting on the fragile bridge they had begun to rebuild. Silence wrapped the room like a velvet curtain, both comforting and insistent, allowing her to confront the ache, the longing, and the weight of decisions she had made. He remained nearby, careful not to intrude, moving softly across the room, tidying small items with quiet intention. His presence was a gentle pulse against her contemplation, a reminder of constancy amid the turbulence of misunderstanding and mistrust. She watched him without speaking, noting the way his shoulders carried the quiet burden of care. the subtle attentiveness in the tilt of his head, the unspoken patience that seemed to surround him like a halo. The room hummed with muted life, the baby's soft breathing marking the rhythm of stillness, and she allowed herself to sink into the quiet reflection, exploring the depth of her own feelings without distraction. Her mind wandered through the tapestry of moments they had shared, tracing back to the night he had appeared at the bus stop, to the gentle attentions that had gradually softened the hard edges of fear and exhaustion. She recalled the evening spent in tentative conversation, the subtle sparks in the silence, the gestures of care that spoke louder than words ever could. Memory and longing intertwined, each recollection a thread weaving into the fragile fabric of connection, reminding her that trust, once fractured, could be rebuilt through deliberate patience and attention. She thought of the choices she had made, the walls she had lowered, and the distance she had endured. The ache of separation had revealed the depth of her attachment, the way absence could sharpen perception and magnify longing. Each night alone had been both punishment and gift, a space in which she confronted the truths of her heart and the reality of what she risked in opening herself again. Reflection brought clarity, yet also hesitation, a recognition that love demanded courage that neither of them had yet fully mastered. He finally approached, settling into a chair nearby with deliberate care, his gaze unobtrusive yet watchful. No words were exchanged at first, the silence stretching between them like a tether. A quiet affirmation that presence alone could communicate what speech might fail to convey. She felt the subtle reassurance of shared space, a gentle acknowledgement that though the past held shadows, the present could still hold possibility. The baby stirred, tiny movements grounding them both, and she realized that reflection, though solitary in thought, could be shared in the quiet communion of hearts. Time seemed to stretch, elastic and slow, each breath marked by contemplation, each glance a silent conversation. She considered his past, his patience, the careful ways in which he had approached her life, and the fragile trust she carried. Understanding blossomed in subtle increments, each reflection a step toward forgiveness, toward embracing the warmth that had begun to root itself quietly but insistently. The rain outside whispered against the windows, a steady reminder of continuity, of life moving forward even in quiet, solitary moments. By the time the night deepened fully, she felt a subtle shift within herself, a release of tension that had coiled tightly around her chest. Reflection had clarified not only fear and longing, but the potential for love to endure despite misunderstandings, absence, and past mistakes. She glanced at him, and though words were unnecessary, a soft acknowledgement passed between them, fragile yet unmistakable. In the stillness of the apartment, with the baby resting peacefully, she understood that healing, trust, and love were paths walked quietly, in moments of reflection, patience, and subtle courage, threads forming a bridge toward what could be reclaimed or renewed. The morning light filtered weakly through rain-streaked windows, soft and muted, casting the apartment in gentle grey tones. She sat by the sill, baby cradled against her chest, tracing the shifting patterns of droplets as they slipped lazily down the glass. Her thoughts drifted, circling the fragile threads that had begun to weave between her and him. The quiet intimacy of shared space and unspoken understanding. Distance had tested them. Doubts had strained the fragile bonds. Yet the past hours of reflection and tentative connection lingered like embers, faint but persistent, whispering that something significant might still be possible. It was then that a letter arrived, slipped under the door with meticulous care, the envelope crisp and unassuming. She picked it up cautiously, sensing the weight of intention behind the simple act, her pulse quickening as she broke the seal. The handwriting was familiar, yet formal, deliberate, and the words inside unfolded like a delicate revelation. Fragments of truth, reminders of what had been left unsaid, and gentle acknowledgments of care stirred her chest, a mixture of hope and trepidation threading through each sentence. The letter was small, yet in its careful phrasing lay the weight of meaning, a bridge across the distance that had held them apart. He entered shortly after, quiet footsteps pausing as he saw the envelope in her hands. Their eyes met, the unspoken recognition of shared understanding passing between them. She hesitated, then spoke, voice soft, tinged with both uncertainty and longing, asking what he had intended, what he had hoped to convey. He responded with measured honesty, carefully revealing what he had withheld, not as deception, but as a choice made to protect, to give her space and time. The explanation melted the last edges of doubt, leaving a subtle warmth in the hollow spaces her heart had reserved for fear. Together, they read fragments of the letter aloud, the baby stirring slightly as if sensing the shift in energy, the tentative pulse of reconciliation and recognition threading through the quiet room. Each phrase, each carefully considered word, illuminated the intentions behind prior actions, bridging the gap between misunderstanding and clarity. She felt the tension that had held them apart loosen, the fragile threads of connection weaving stronger under the soft pressure of honesty and trust. The moment was intimate yet public in its shared reality, a testament to the power of clarity in shaping hearts and choices. The rain outside softened into mist, the city humming quietly beyond the apartment walls, and she felt a stirring of something deeper than mere relief. Hope shimmered faintly at the edges of her consciousness, a promise that even when circumstances had conspired to keep them apart, destiny might still intervene in small, deliberate gestures. The weight of longing and absence had sharpened awareness, and now the simple act of reading and understanding a carefully penned letter seemed to realign the trajectory of what might be. He reached for her hand, hesitant at first, then steady, bridging the physical space and echoing the emotional reconciliation taking place. The warmth of his touch, gentle and deliberate, radiated through her, grounding the moment in reality while illuminating the possibilities that had been teased by fate. She returned the gesture with equal care, allowing herself to surrender to the small certainty that the connection was not random, but orchestrated by the subtle forces of timing, circumstance, and choice. In the quiet hours that followed, they spoke softly. The baby nestled between them, and the apartment seemed to hold its breath. Each word was deliberate, each glance loaded with meaning, and the tension of prior misunderstandings dissolved into a shared rhythm of trust. Outside, the city moved indifferently, yet within these walls, a glimpse of fate had intervened, threading possibility through the fragile tapestry of their lives. She realized that despite past doubts, despite distance and hesitation, destiny had a subtle hand, guiding them toward moments of clarity, connection, and the faintest, most fragile spark of enduring love. The evening sky was a tapestry of gray clouds and fading sunlight, the rain beginning once again in soft silver threads against the windows. She stepped onto the small balcony, the baby swaddled against her chest, and let the misted air wash over her, tentative and fragile, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and the faint aroma of distant blooms. Her thoughts drifted to him, to the nights of whispered conversation, misread signals, and the fragile spark that had been teased into existence. Every heartbeat seemed to echo with anticipation, a subtle rhythm of longing and hope. Footsteps approached softly, careful yet deliberate, and she turned sharply, heart tightening as her eyes met his across the misted courtyard. Time seemed to suspend, the city fading into a blur, leaving only the quiet intensity of the moment between them. The baby shifted slightly in her arms, tiny fingers curling against her coat, as if sensing the weight of the reunion, the delicate balance of fear and expectation in the air. His eyes held the same mixture of caution and longing she had felt mirrored in herself, a reflection of shared vulnerability and unspoken desire. He stepped closer, the rain streaking down around them in soft silver sheets, yet neither moved away. Every detail was vivid, the slight tremor in his hands, the pull of his gaze, the quiet exhale as if the air itself carried the acknowledgement of their trials. She realized, with a breath caught in her chest, that this was the culmination of countless moments of doubt, distance, and reflection. The fragile, luminous intersection of hearts that had endured misunderstanding and longing. Her pulse quickened as he reached, gentle, deliberate, extending a hand toward her, toward the life she carried and the trust that had begun to root in the fragile soil of their connection. The first touch was tentative, measured, but it bridged every shadow that had lingered between them. Fingers met, warmth radiating through the rain-soaked night. A simple act, heavy with acknowledgement, apology, and the quiet promise of devotion. The baby cooed softly, tiny eyes blinking in the dim light, anchoring them to the present, to the delicate reality of shared responsibility and shared love. She felt the tension of past days dissolve, replaced with a tremulous hope that whispered of forgiveness, of possibility, of a future still unwritten yet luminous with promise. They spoke in low, deliberate tones, words chosen for clarity and care, unraveling misunderstandings with the soft patience born of trials endured apart. The rain fell steadily, silver threads weaving around them, creating a private universe within the city's relentless hum. Laughter, soft and tentative, mingled with whispered confessions, and she noticed the warmth radiating from his presence, subtle yet insistent, grounding her fears and illuminating the depth of his care. Every glance, every gentle adjustment of the baby's blanket, every measured word was a testament to the quiet power of trust restored and love nurtured in the most fragile circumstances. Night deepened, the city lights shimmering through the mist, and they remained close, a triad of warmth between her, the baby, and him. She realized how much they had endured. Distance, misunderstanding, fear, and unspoken doubt, and how every challenge had led to this luminous moment, where rain and light, hesitation and courage intertwined seamlessly. The baby stirred a soft stretch of tiny limbs, and she smiled, feeling the full weight and beauty of connection, the promise of shared nights and mornings, of whispered words and gentle touch. As they stood together beneath the silver curtain of rain, hands intertwined, hearts beating in careful synchrony, she felt a subtle yet undeniable truth settle within her chest. Love, tested and tempered by trials, by longing and reflection, could bloom in the quiet spaces between moments of fear. The night held them tenderly, rain and light dancing across the courtyard, echoing the fragile, luminous beauty of a bond reforged, a connection deepened, and a hope renewed. In the soft glow of streetlights and mist, with the baby nestled safely against her, she understood that reunion was not just the meeting of bodies, but of hearts and trust, fragile yet enduring, luminous against the shadows of the past. The dawn arrived soft and unhurried, pale light spilling gently across the apartment, illuminating the quiet aftermath of nights long endured, and storms quietly survived. She sat by the window, baby nestled against her chest, feeling the tender warmth of life and love intertwined in fragile yet undeniable harmony. The rain had ceased, leaving the city washed clean, streets gleaming under the tentative sun, mirroring the clarity she felt blooming within. Beside her, he moved quietly, his presence steady and unobtrusive, a living reminder that care and patience could heal what doubt and fear had threatened to undo. Days had passed since the reunion, and in their rhythm together she discovered a new cadence to life, one of deliberate tenderness, shared responsibility, and subtle intimacy. Every small gesture, from brushing a stray lock of hair from the baby's forehead to the quiet morning coffee they shared, carried the weight of care, of trust rebuilt, of love nurtured in the fragile spaces between ordinary moments. She marveled at how resilience could grow quietly, rooted in patience, forgiveness, and the gentle insistence of presence. Outside, the world moved on, oblivious to the quiet miracle unfolding within their walls. Yet she felt a profound connection to the rhythm of life, to the subtle persistence of hope and possibility. He approached, hands warm and certain, lifting the baby into his arms with careful precision. She watched them, a smile brushing her lips, feeling a swell of gratitude that surpassed words. The knowledge that love had endured, that sacrifice and patience had transformed longing and fear into a luminous bond, capable of sustaining hearts and healing wounds. They moved together through the apartment, laughter soft and easy, the baby cooing with curiosity, tiny fingers curling around theirs as if claiming them both in the unspoken language of connection. She realized that love had been tested, shaped by storms of misunderstanding, absence, and doubt. Yet it had emerged resilient, strengthened by the deliberate choices of hearts willing to risk vulnerability. Every glance exchanged, every whispered word, carried the weight of survival and the promise of a shared future. Luminous against the quiet backdrop of ordinary life made extraordinary by devotion. Evening fell slowly, golden light spilling across the floor, painting the room with warmth that mirrored the soft glow within her chest. They sat together, a triad of fragile, tender life and enduring love. Hands intertwined, hearts steady in rhythm, the city humming beyond their windows. She reflected on the nights of fear, the long stretches of longing, the misunderstandings that had stretched between them like shadows, and marveled at the resilience of hearts that had chosen to believe again, to trust, to embrace hope in the fragile spaces of ordinary days. The baby stirred, tiny eyes blinking at the shifting light, and she leaned forward, pressing her cheek gently against its head. He mirrored the movement, their gestures synchronized without thought, a silent testament to the bond that had grown through adversity. In that quiet communion, she understood that love's power was not in grand declarations, but in the steady rhythm of presence, the unspoken pledge to endure, protect, and nurture. They had traversed fear, distance, and uncertainty, and now, in the soft glow of evening and the warmth of intertwined lives, love had anchored itself firmly, luminous and unwavering. As the night deepened and stars began to peek through the thinning clouds, she felt the last vestiges of doubt and fear dissolve into quiet peace. Life had been tested, hearts had been stretched, yet here they were, whole, connected, resilient. The apartment, the rain-slick streets, the soft light of evening, all bore witness to the quiet triumph of trust and devotion. And somewhere in the delicate silence between heartbeats, she felt it fully, deeply, undeniably. Love had endured, transformed by trials, strengthened by presence, and now existed in a tender, luminous constancy that would guide them through all days to come. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, love began again.